City Council work session, Monday, May 13th, 2019, 4:30 PM at the Thomas J. Smith Council Chambers, City Hall. We have the proposed regular agenda for May 20th, 2019. You have some mayor's awards, 10-year award, and a public hearing. Consideration of an ordinance rezoning a portion of property locally known as 705 Maple Street from C2 General Commercial to C1 Limited Commercial Zoning District. This will be the first reading on this one.
So this is requested rezoning by the property owner, former Salter School, currently offices for Pro Plumbing. They're looking to add some residential to the property. Under the C2 designation, residential is not allowed. In C1, it is allowed in upper story or rear of the building. They're looking to actually bring their parents into the property with an apartment unit in the structure. Our inspectors went through it. It looks like it could have 3 or 4 units. They're only looking to do the one at this time, but they do have 3 or 4 offices, a workshop, the gymnasium still. But it is zone C1, limited commercial on most of Maple Street. It's C2 currently for the former Salter School, the Pro Plumbing, and the Ferguson, just being larger sites, larger buildings that allowed more uses in the sites, but the C1 would allow the mixed use of residential and commercial. It does follow the comprehensive plan. The future land use map for neighborhood mixed use indicates C1 is an allowed use. And the Planning Commission met on April 23rd and voted 6-0 to recommend approval to the council.
That's the apartments within the
building.
Current structure.
Yeah. Yep.
The old school, but not in is that a metal building?
Yeah, that's a storage building.
Okay.
It would only be in the actual school building.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And it would have to meet all housing code standards and get a rental permit and all that.
Correct. Any other questions or concerns on that one?
So parking's not gonna be an issue there?
No, they have
Okay.
plenty of
Plenty
parking in the
parking,
rear
okay.
and pretty limited parking for their current use.
Okay. And again, that is only the first reading. All right, then we have the proposed consent agenda for May 20th. Number 1 is a resolution approving nuisance abatements for various properties. Anyone have any issues with those?
No.
Number 2 is a resolution approving city council manual rules and procedures. I don't know if we have anything on that one.
This is essentially as you had seen it the previous time. I think that there is a table in the back, and I didn't look at this. I know that, anyone know what the end of this manual is? I hadn't heard any first, we presented this, I think 2 work sessions ago, and the council had been satisfied with it. I hadn't had any comments come back of any changes or alterations that you're looking to make, so we went ahead to put it on its final draft. In the meantime, our attorney had seen something in the Cityscape, the league's newsletter, and it talked about a template for, see if it votes, and I wanted to see if I could find that. I think it's the last. He did not put it in here that I can see, so he talked about having a template in there. If it ends up getting added, I will let you know that, and it may be something that we would pull off the consent just for that reason, so that you knew that had been in there.
Right.
And it wasn't a major thing. It was just something that he thought was a tool of reference that he might like to add. But I guess I just don't see that he has done that, so.
Okay. All right.
Otherwise, it is as we had discussed at the last time.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions on that one?
Did we change the Martin Luther King Day thing?
It is added, and so if you'll notice, what section that is, that's near the front
Okay.
where it
I
talks
see
about
including-
holidays.
I was just making sure I was reading it correctly. I see it now, okay.
Yep, so it shows in there for holidays, we won't meet on holidays that fall on a Monday, and it shows in parentheses inclusive of the holiday, the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday.
Okay, good.
We would meet on Tuesday instead.
Very good. All right, number 3 is a resolution approving purchase of temporary construction easements for the 2019 locust sewer separation.
Jesse Howe, city engineer. This item is essentially for 16 temporary easements for the Locust Street Sewer Separation Project, or Locust Basin, I should say. Amount to roughly $1,800 in costs. We have 48 altogether, but we still have 13 outstanding that we need to track down. And I think we're gonna start going door to door pretty soon to try to track the rest of them down. So the project's set to start in late June, early July, so we got a little bit of time, but it's getting awful close. So this is 2 of hopefully 3.
All right.
Thanks.
Any questions or concerns on that one? Nope, thank you. Number 4, I have a resolution approving application for funds from the Transportation Alternatives Program, TAP, for the West Avenue Trail connection.
This is, excuse me, we applied for TAP funds back in December. The council approved a resolution. They've gone through scoring, and one thing they noted in our resolution was they require a maintenance period of 20 years upon completion. And that wasn't noted in the previous resolution, and for the city to be considered for funds, that would have to be added to that. We were one of the higher scoring applications. The board meets to make a final determination in a couple weeks, and they would need this before that to, for the city to be awarded funds. So it mirrors pretty closely to what was approved December 17th, 2018 by the council, but does add that maintenance period of 20 years within the resolution. So this is for the West Avenue Trail between Roosevelt along the south side of Notre Dame property. They'll connect back to the trail that runs on the west side of Edstone School. So
Any questions or concerns on that one?
None.
All right. Number 5, I have a resolution approving exclusive listing agreement, gross rent for lease of available space at the depot, 300 South Main Street with Terrace Real Estate Group, LLC.
So as we don't have a renter for the space that we've white boxed, Jesse did forward a listing agreement with his standard terms on it. It would be for a 12-month period with I think it's a 6% fee that's associated with 6% commission on the gross lease. This is something that probably is beyond my ability to just sign off on. We're not in a position to market it, but if we're gonna market it, it would be beneficial to get it out there with a listing agent, so would
Right.
recommend
That's what you
moving
do.
forward with it.
Sounds good. That'll be nice to get somebody in there. Any other questions or comments, concerns?
None, Your Honor.
Okay. Number 6, I have a resolution rejecting all bids for the 2019 Danquart Park Pool Improvement Project.
So we received, had bid opening on May 7th. We received one bid from SG Construction, the amount of $569,936. The Southeast Iowa Swim Club is the party that is raising funds for the pool. They had a general budget of around $300,000 for this portion, exclusive of their purchase of the actual bubble. So this is quite over what their ability to move forward with. So after discussion, we're recommending to reject the bids, and they're kind of reconvening to see how they want to move forward with it, whether it's trying to have options with the plans. There's limited options there because what was in there is required to have this facility, or looking at other resources. So we'll see if they're able to come back. Their goal is to still try and move forward with it, but they have to be able to afford to do it. So
Right. I don't know if they were possibly able to have some discussion with the companies themselves who were going out to bid for those.
they have had discussion on why the bids came in higher than they
Or if there
expected.
was some
and-
sort of charitable,
Yeah, yep. I think that's
work
something
they would
they're
be willing-
reaching out to, whether there's different organizations there, but
Right.
If they substantially change the plans, its scope, we'd have to go through reapproval of plans and specs, but otherwise we could rebid it if they're able to figure out a way to make it work within the current plans and specs.
Right.
In your opinion, Eric, if we rebid, would we get better response or not?
No idea,
No idea to
unless
tell.
they're able to make some contacts on getting more in-kind contributions or
Right,
different
in
things
kind
like
from
that, yeah.
whichever company would
Mm.
bid on that.
Do you know if there was one particular piece of it that was so much higher, or is this the whole project?
Basically the whole project,
Okay.
like different, it was a sole bid, lump sum bid.
It was lump sum,
Yeah,
okay.
but they were, and they had concrete, they had the pool house that,
Yeah.
I think all the elements were higher than they expected.
That's too bad, because they've worked so hard for this project. It's discouraging.
Yeah.
Hang in there, guys.
Yeah, just delayed a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Did
One-
we have an estimate on,
They had an engineer's estimate, so this has all flowed through them, which has
Okay.
kind of been difficult. They had an engineer's estimate of 225,000 that, Our opinion
Our
seemed
staff
low, yeah.
that wasn't an accurate
Like that.
estimate.
right,
seemed like
Well,
a goal.
anyway, we didn't understand how they were gonna get costs at that level.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
So
guess it was with those in-kind contributions.
one thing associated with this, it's not on the agenda, we're gonna add, a resolution, approving swim lesson fees. The city's gonna do swim lessons this year, somewhat related, but also they're having a hard time getting it coordinated here, and we don't want it to just fall by the wayside. And so we
Absolutely.
asked them if they're not able to by end of last week, we would wanna do it so that we can continue it, but the fees were established last year for that Eastern Iowa Swim Club, so we're gonna add a
Way too high.
resolution,
Very good. I'm glad we're being a little bit more proactive with that as well then.
yeah. So that'll be added to the agenda.
All right. Any other questions or comments on that one? Okay. Next item is number 6, resolution, just kidding. Resolution number 7, approving requests of Burlington Rag Committee.
So,
They're
I-
not gonna be
we
here
had-
tonight, but they could be here on Monday if there's questions.
yeah, the Leadership Academy is doing their graduation tonight down at the depot, so I had thought that someone was gonna be here. Jeremy said that someone would be here, but regardless, comes out of the discussion that they had with their presentation, the last work session.
Yeah.
The 3 items that you see in this resolution were discussed last time. Having the city parks to allow the camping. We've talked with them about the need to have just one coordinated special event application. It is so different from what our typical special event process is. It doesn't make sense to reserve individual parks and sites for it. They would like to see the fee waived. And to be honest, I don't know how we would come up with a fee that matches what the event does anyway, because it just doesn't fit within the structure of what our special event fees are. Then we had a little bit of a discussion about what potential overtime costs were. What had been presented by Major Grimshaw was looking at possibly 25,000, and I think he felt that was on the high side total between the police, fire, and streets. He thinks it's gonna be lower. I know yours is lower than that, but he wanted to put a budget in there that would hit the higher end depending on what happened for lack of other volunteers, specifically on the, for emergency services, the fire side, ambulance side. He thought there'd be some volunteer help from the hospital that would help to keep our costs minimized, but, anyway, they would like to see us absorb those costs, for this type of event. I think that's, acceptable for what's going on a community basis.
Right.
And they have not asked for funds to help to fund this event. I don't know if they still will. I told them that before they were to do that, I'd like to see what comparable events or what other communities our size have done for RAGBRAI to make sure that we're in line with what's going on. they may not have to, I'm not sure. It may be that they've decided they can make the budget work without us contributing towards it, but regardless, these are the items that I know that they're wanting to see us take under consideration, and I'm okay with them. I think they make sense.
Any other questions or concerns on those?
No concerns here.
Okay. All right, sounds good. We're excited.
Just
Number
need
8.
good weather.
Yeah, right.
It'll be fun.
Number 8, we've got some set date for public hearings on June 3rd, 2019. First, we have a consideration of plans and specifications for the 2019 HMA street resurfacing project. I don't know if we wanted to discuss anything on these.
We typically don't on the set dates.
Okay. The second is a consideration of plans and specifications for 2019 Seal Coat Street resurfacing project. And the third is a consideration of sale of a portion of vacated alley right-of-way located north of 320 Louisa Street. And these are all set dates for public hearings on June 3rd.
What we can say, I think, is your estimate, or what you're trying to design, Jesse, about a $400,000 seal coat project? And is it, how much is the HMA?
Around 600.
600,000 for the HMA?
Very good. Next, we have our discussion items. The first is the 28E DESCOM agreement.
So with council having decided not to approve the agreement as presented, which the majority of the entities have, had already approved, this went back to DESCOM board on Friday to discuss. I think that, John, you represented the city, and what did you bring forward to them for consideration?
I brought forward a compromise of doing a 2-year agreement rather than a 5-year agreement. And so then they were going to present, and my understanding was they were going to present that amendment to the other entities and have it re-voted on. Is that what, I believe that's the process.
So DESCOM board did approve modifying the agreement as presented, essentially the same agreement that was presented to the council last time, but reducing the length of the agreement from the 5 years to 2 years. It's hard to know how the other communities are gonna address this, specifically the county. County had none of their actual members that sit on the DESCOM board there. They had one alternate that was there who doesn't really have a say or a full understanding, I would say, on how the supervisors would want to move forward on this. Until you know how the other entities are going to move forward, it's kind of hard to know which agreement is the one that needs to be considered still at the 5-year being where they want to go, or if they're willing to move forward with that 2-year. I would say West Burlington is likely to be willing to move forward with a two-year based on, well, at least.
Based on one the representative, yes.
But that's not, he doesn't have a vote in the matter either.
No.
So it's kind of, in the other communities, it's really hard to know since they're not sitting on that board either and able to make their wishes known. We are down to a month and a half to have a final decision made. We can have this come up at the next council meeting if the council is willing to consider the modified agreement with just a two years rather than a 5, and all other terms being equal. But that's kind of up to you if that's what you all want to consider, or if you feel that's not enough movement for you as a group.
So I want to clarify one thing. Has the county's rate, is that going to change next year at a roughly a decrease of 16 cents? Because I spoke with a lady at the county and indicated that a countywide levy would be 66 cents, but the 2020 levy for city residents was gonna drop by 16 cents because they're going to a new, their portion's going to a new funding mechanism. Is that all still the case, or do you? We don't
I
know? Okay.
don't track county levies at
As
all.
long, I'm okay with that, as long as that, she told me that they passed that, as long as that hasn't changed on their end, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I think that is the case, but we did not discuss the county levy.
Well, that's gonna be
so.
a county thing, so obviously
Right.
it's probably not gonna take place inside the
Yeah.
DESCOM board. But it sounds like, there's gonna be a concession made of 16 cents already on their end, for next year. As long as that's maintained, I'm okay with the 2-year, and then we can figure something out in the next couple of years and get this fixed.
That's for sure what they're looking for is you know, do we feel as a majority that this would be passed with a 2-year degree, or a 2-year agreement versus a 5-year, so.
Yeah, John, I'm okay with it too. I think we voted and demonstrated that we weren't pleased with what was happening, and this is at least a step in the right direction towards getting some change.
Well, I'm all about doing that, but I wanna make sure we get it fixed,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, ultimately, we want
But
to get it fixed.
according, based on the math, sat down and worked it out, but they're gonna take a 16-cent decrease on the city's portion of the county levy. And then rural residents are gonna see an increase next year already, so there's a little bit of give there, at the end of the day. So, and our levy's at 90 cents, is that what we figured out?
It takes about 90 cents of
Okay.
our levy to cover this.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess we're gonna put it for a vote on the city council
We can
next
put it, and it
week?
would be on regular agenda.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
And kind of see what happens in the meantime, if any other entities have taken action.
Because which entity was it that hasn't voted on it yet?
I think Danville,
Was it Danville? Yeah, I think so.
They were-
Middletown.
Well, Middletown. That's correct, Middletown.
All right, so if we approved this with the limited 2-year agreement, then what would be our next steps? How would we continue that discussion?
Well, first,
With, that, you know, with.
It's gonna come
then
back up in 2 years,
First-
and we'll have to talk about
yeah.
it again.
In 2
the other-
years? That doesn't seem like an appropriate
you're gonna have to have,
response.
you're gonna have,
we'll be discussing it before 2 years.
Okay, that's what
You're
I'm
gonna
saying,
have to.
is how do we get that discussion in front of the entities that need to approve that?
Well, I think what you'll see is happen is the DESCOM board will start working on that, partnering with maybe the Emergency Management Commission. We'll have to do some discussions. There's a couple ways to go about that, at least get to the point where we're discussing it. That's the frustrating thing in the meeting is that, you know, all entities were willing to discuss with the exception of the county. And as far as what our options were at, and that's not to throw anybody in the bus, it's the facts.
Facts.
So, you know, I think with it being a 2-year agreement, my thought was that it would keep the focus on the issue. It would still, you know, we don't want our citizens to think they're not gonna have 911 service. So it can make sure that that's going through no problem. But then also keep the focus on this agreement going forward.
But, I mean, you still have a 2-year agreement in place, I mean, that's not gonna
Right.
go anywhere, so.
Yeah, you'll
it
have
gives-
2-year
essentially
agreement.
you have a 2-year window in order to come up with a funding mechanism that
Right.
can be.
Because you know what happens, 5-year agreement, we
Right.
have other issues come at us, it gets put on the back burner, and then we're at the
Yeah.
same spot.
I
we
just
were.
don't want it to be, oh, we've got 2 years to talk about it again.
I agree with you.
I think this needs to happen at every single meeting until something is hammered out.
Their meeting.
On the
Right.
DESCOMs, yeah. Yeah.
On DESCOM's meeting, because if, you know, if that's something we don't agree with, just because of the time length, you know, there's obviously something else that we don't agree with within that contract, within that agreement.
I'm with you, Mayor Pro Tem.
So I think it's important that we somehow, and that's my question, is how do we, you know, how can we be sure that those discussions are happening and updates are being brought to us, I guess, is my,
Well, I'm the
We can ensure it's gonna happen,
city's
but-
representative, so it's
Right.
gonna be on me to make sure that those conversations happen, and then we'll have to report them back.
Well, and also by the fact that we're approving only a 2-year agreement.
right,
I mean,
There's-
I get that, but That
there's
doesn't-
still very little desire, I think, from the DESCOM board to talk about this issue over the course of if you get this in place
Yeah.
and you have a 2-year agreement in place that begins July 1, the first year, you're not gonna see
not a lot of movement.
Because there's too long a time yet before it becomes an item. It's most likely gonna be the beginning of that second year where you're beginning those discussions, which
Right.
is about where we were last time, where DESCOM boards at least started the process of looking at it
And it
in
should,
that
it
final
should
year.
take place, there were 3 no votes for the 5-year, and that's 3 council members that their terms will end up expiring about then. So, that keeps the focus on the people that are upset about it to begin with, so. I guess that's that's why I was pushing for the 2-year agreement.
Is there any reason why we couldn't push for 1 year?
I don't think you'd get it.
You're-
I don't know if
I'm just,
Yeah.
because 2 years is a long
I
time
agree.
to, 1 year is a long time to not even discuss something.
I would assume that if we can come up with a funding mechanism that everybody agrees with, we can go ahead and put a new agreement in place, can't you?
You certainly could. I don't think you have agreement, though.
No, you don't have an agreement, and plus, if it's, you'd really have to, you'd almost have to force the issue to, if you're on a 5-year agreement, to get it modified earlier.
Right.
So, I think the 2 years is our best bet. The 1 year, I agree, I'd like it done today, I'd like
Right.
but I think a 2-year agreement gives us time to continue to look at it. A lot of things came to light in a rapid fashion that we, quite honestly, I don't think a lot of people were aware of. So, as far as the way it was working before, so this gives us a chance to slow down, analyze it, but also a collective breath that, hey, look, we do have 911 service, so I would recommend the 2-year agreement.
Okay. I'm just, yep. If that's as good as it gets.
That's as good as I think we can get right now, yes, ma'am.
All right. Any other comments or questions on that one? Okay. Discussion item number 2 is the DNR presentation, downtown flood mapping.
I have 7 copies of this presentation, if anyone is interested in having a copy of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about floodplain mapping in a downtown area. I believe it's called the Hawkeye Sewer Basin. Is that right, Eric? Okay. My name is Scott Ralston. I'm the floodplain mapping program lead for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. This is Chris Colley. He's our GIS manager. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of context before I go through the agenda. We're in the process of providing digital mapping for all the counties in Iowa. That's the charge that the state legislature gave us 10 years ago. And so we're 10 years into this floodplain mapping program. And Des Moines County is one of 47 counties that we got $5.3 million from FEMA in a grant to take all these countywide flood insurance rate maps to an effective status. And it's a large project. It's a lot of money from FEMA. But like I said, Des Moines County is one of 47 counties that we're doing this for. Just to give you some context, the preliminary countywide map for Des Moines County was issued August 27th of 2018. About a month later, we had a CCO meeting, a Consultation Coordination Officer meeting, and an open house. And I believe you attended those meetings, Chris? Okay. And then over a year before that, in April of 2017, we had a draft flood hazard product review meeting with all the officials in Des Moines County. And so these preliminary maps for Des Moines County will be going effective on June 19th of 2020. That's how long it takes to go through all of the appeal process and the due process part of the project. And this is true for all 47 counties. So, and the reason we're here today, I believe there was a discussion of the Zone A area
downtown Burlington. And this came up in the context of comments, is that right?
If you wanna click forward.
What's that?
Were you gonna flip forward and show the map?
Yeah, I'll show you the map here. This is the area we're talking about. Whoops, excuse me. This Zone A area in gold. And this is an area that is on the effective map right now, and it will be carried over into the effective map in the future. That'll become effective in June of 2020. This is an approximate base level Zone A floodplain. This is a Zone AE limited detailed study with cross sections on it. And as we've discovered, and I discovered talking to Eric, there's a combined sewer in here, a rather large combined sewer. And what we intend on doing is putting this into our business plan. And let me go back and just describe what our business plan is. So basically, I want to talk about the CTP business plan and give an example of what we did in the city of Boone, Iowa, which is very similar to what we'd be doing here. And then talk about the effective existing floodplain, the proposed new mapping, and then some timeline issues and the results of the project. We became a cooperating technical partner in August of 2009 with FEMA. We signed an agreement with FEMA. We're 10 years into that agreement now. And that means that we partner with FEMA. We agree to follow all of their guidelines and specifications and all of their guidance. They in turn allow us to get funding, and that's been real important in the last 3 years especially. So in order to be a CTP, you have to develop a business plan, which is about a 5 to 7 year plan into the future on how we're gonna expend the CTP grant money that we get from FEMA. So this is last year's business plan. In the table of contents, basically we look at resources and our partners, and then activities and current needs. So we'd be looking at identifying the city of Burlington as a need in the fiscal 2020 grant cycle. Right now, we're preparing the grant application for the 2019, and that's all set, so we can't get you into the fiscal 19 grant, but we can get you into the fiscal 20 grant. This is an example in Boone, Iowa. It's very similar to what's going on in the Zone A area in Burlington. This red outline here is an effective Zone A area that we restudied, and there's sewers going through this area. The flow is northeast to southwest here. And you can see the blue area is what they ended up with after studying it. And they used a program called XP Swim to analyze the storm system and figure out how much water is going into the storm system and how much surcharges during a 100-year event. And that would create the floodplain here that you see. And then they do cross sections, and they map the resulting area. This Boone County map will be going effective in a couple years, but we'd be talking about doing something similar through the CTP grant program for the city of Burlington. And this is an area with aerial photography shown. Now, in talking to Eric, I believe there's a large detention basin in this area here. We went out and looked at it right before we came to the council meeting, and there's a large area here with a big outlet works. And there's another detention area, I believe, up to the northern area. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, just right up in this area.
Okay. And so what this project would do would be to look at the possibility, I don't know if you've looked at additional detention or if your engineer has mentioned anything about additional detention?
No, yeah.
Okay. So we basically be remapping this area from here. This is a 1 square mile threshold. That's where we start mapping. And then the drainage area down here is about 4.8 square miles. And that includes all of this tributary and all of this. So the project would involve doing new hydrology and hydraulics for this whole basin. And right now, I'm not sure what your flooding is downtown during a major event. You've had flooding along the Mississippi, obviously, this year. I don't know if your combined sewer takes a portion of that flow, or if it, I don't know.
Takes quite a bit of it, but during a 100-year event.
You get the overland flow? Okay.
So that was one of the questions that we had for you folks, was what's the
I-
system?
Could you come up to the microphone?
Yeah.
That was one of the questions that we had for you folks, was what is this system designed to contain? You know, you had asked this question before. You don't understand, you realize it's overland flow, but it all goes underground. Well, when it reaches a certain point, it can't go underground anymore, and it has to go out.
Right.
And that would be part of this study, is to evaluate that and see, okay, at the 100-year event, that sort of thing, what's gonna be flowing overground.
Okay.
And these were all put in like 1903, so
Right,
they, we haven't done a recent mapping on,
yeah.
you know, with the development and everything else, what the 100-year storm does to it. When we do get our study done on our storm system, that's one of the things that we're going to eventually end up doing, figuring out how much impervious area we have and all the capacity and how quick all that water will get to the inlet of the Hawkeye sewer, so.
Very good.
And I wanted to say, and maybe this would be helpful for you as well, when we were doing the statewide program, and I think it was about 2012 or 13, somebody at the city here gave me all your Mylar maps that were scanned and digitized, and we've taken those and rectified them so that they fall in the right place spatially. So if that would be helpful for you folks in evaluating what you have, you know, let me know, I can give it to you. It's not gonna have any updates or anything like that to it, but it would be the base system.
And we're also not sure how accurate this Zone A map is. We have had requests for base flood elevations in our office. So Bill Capuccio, he's an engineer with the DNR. He's developed some letters of map amendment, or given the information so that those letters can be developed. But he said it's very difficult to identify the base flood elevation in here because of the fact that you have this underground sewer, and the overflow is what constitutes the floodplain. So, like I said, we'd be putting this into the fiscal 2020 business plan. We're looking at probably about $300,000 to study this area. That's a very rough estimate. And we'd also include this area, basically this area down, this area up here all the way down to here. We'd be redoing all of this. And that would be done as a physical map revision. There's about 4 panels, flood insurance rate map panels in this area. So we'd be updating those, and that would be a separate project from the countywide flood insurance rate map. And this is your final outfall. There's twin 12 by 10, 10 by 10 combined sewers that go out to the river. There's another 8 by 8.5 foot combined sewer here. This is the railroad tracks. I believe the floodplain kind of goes right through in this area. So basically, the engineer that would be doing this work would be a consultant hired by the DNR to evaluate the capacity. We'd probably work closely with your engineer to get this information. So that's a little bit disjointed, but are there any questions about the scope of the work that we would be proposing?
You mentioned this is a FY20, part of the
2020.
FY 2020 budget
Yep.
fiscal plan. What does that mean for when would work
Okay.
happen?
Good question, Jim. That money will be applied for in probably May or June of 2020. They'll approve the grant in August of 2020. The money will be available fiscal 21, beginning of the federal fiscal year. So October 1st of 2020 is when we can start expending the funds from the grant monies.
And would you plan on being here fairly soon after that date to start doing that, or?
Yeah, I can show you a timeline here.
Okay.
This is just a quick note on the LiDAR. You all familiar with LiDAR? Light detection and ranging? Chris, do you want to give just a quick overview of what the improvement is here?
Okay, so, this is actually, these two screenshots are the same exact space, geographically. And one is from the 30-meter DEM, which is what your current map was based off of, and the other is the LiDAR, so 1-meter product. You can obviously see the difference in the resolution. Lots of little nooks and crannies are represented there too. So this would change your floodplain in the downtown area probably dramatically. I don't know to what degree, but there's gonna be a lot more resolution in your downtown area. It just so happens that right now, hopefully they have collected in Des Moines County, but there's a new LiDAR effort going on in the state through NRCS and the DNR and USGS to redo all the LiDAR for the state. They're starting with all the counties that go along the Mississippi River.
And then 2 counties in, about 25 counties.
Yeah, about 25 counties. So we would have new LiDAR then to use for this study when it goes forward as well. You know, we're kind of here to start an agreement with you folks on how to go forward. And we do have some things that would be nice if we could get from you. You want to go into that?
Yeah. Typically, there's local ownership of the project. We would probably be relying on the city of Burlington for the survey to confirm the tops of rims on all the manholes. I believe these old Mylars that we're talking about, and you can see here, the invert elevations are measured from the top of the manhole down. We'd need to have the tops of those rims done.
Yeah, and it's only for the manholes. It's not the stream and all that. And
Yeah.
perhaps you folks already have that. Yeah, 'cause I'd say you
Okay.
might already have it, so that's good. And there's a head start for you.
So looking at the timeline, that's your question, Jim. We'd be getting this money in 2020. We'd start the engineering then. Project coordination and scoping would happen in 2020 and 21. The flood insurance rate map, physical map revision panels would be produced during 2021. I've talked to one of our mapping partners, and he thinks about 9 months to do the analysis. And then what would happen is you'd have preliminary maps issued for just those panels, those 4 panels downtown. And then you'd start going through this post-preliminary processing, which is the due process, following all the Code of Federal Regulations and all that. And this is that process in detail. We don't need to go into detail, but basically we'd be looking at effective maps in September of 2023. I know that sounds like a long ways out into the future, but that's how long it takes to go through and develop these maps and go through all the FEMA procedures and get everything done.
And it could go quicker as well, because it all depends, you know, or slower, depending on when they can come out for the survey. And that's what's gonna kick the whole thing off. He said from start of survey to model made, 9 months.
Yeah.
So if we get the money in October of 2021 and get everything surveyed from you folks and do the modeling and all that, it could be earlier in 2021, and then that would make this late 2022. So, you know,
And then
it's all,
the DNR would come back to the city and have a flood risk review meeting. We'd go over all the results of the floodplain mapping before we go into the rest of the process. Work with you folks, make sure you're comfortable with the floodplain and all that, so. So that's basically what we wanted to present today. We'd like to get a little bit of some feedback on how critical you think this floodplain area is in terms of, you know, functioning and how you deal with floodplain permitting and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know, have you ever compared this mapped floodplain to what actually happens during a major event? Have you had major events?
I think,
on
I think I've only ever experienced 2 events downtown, and maybe Jesse can correct me, but in all the years I've lived in Burlington, and have actually been here, I've seen it twice where it's been, we've had a major rain event, which has flooded Jefferson Street and made it impassable.
Okay,
Outside of those 2 events, I don't know that I've ever seen or heard of an event like that taking place. One question I had, you said it'd be roughly $300,000. Where does that money come from? What would the city's commitment be? Does all of that come from FEMA, or does,
The majority of that would come from FEMA,
and what would a majority be?
$250,000 probably.
Okay,
What we'd rely on the city to provide for the project would be the surveying. And if a lot of that's already done, you could just provide that and that would be your in-kind services. The rest of it is all FEMA money. And we administer these grants. We've been doing this for the last 9 years.
Jesse, do you have an idea what we would be able to provide out of what we already have versus what would still need to be collected? I mean,
If it's just rim elevations and inverts, we have essentially all of that. They may change a little bit, some of the Tiger grant process going on Jefferson, but we would have updated, rim and invert elevation at that point as well.
And
So-
right now, you can see contours. This looks like it was developed on a assumed 100-foot elevation basis. I see a 90-foot contour there and 100, and then the rest is all measured out.
What-
Okay, so we need those to NAVD 88, basically.
so we probably aren't looking at a lot of
Local money.
out of pocket. It's gonna be some time though from our engineering department. So, which is a lot different than if you were to go with Klingner's approach for what this is. Klingner's approach was a lot cheaper. It also wasn't as inclusive as what this one is.
Okay,
You're including a little bit larger area in your study.
well, but at the end of the day, in order to influence flood rate mapping, it's all gonna have to be FEMA approved, isn't it?
Yes, either way
yeah, this goes
requires
through
the
a
same
rigorous,
process.
Right.
quality control process.
So, even though Klinger was cheaper, did it include all of the stuff that was gonna be
But
required?
it was also all our costs, but
Exactly,
uh,
but,
and we had your department, you guys reviewed what Klingner was looking for scope, and we're
Yeah,
okay.
is that part of the review?
We're okay with what they were doing and thought it looked appropriate. I don't know if it matches what you are doing with your process.
Right, I think it did look appropriate, yes, but it wasn't the same extent of study and
Because
probably didn't include all the details.
It doesn't include all the above areas, the purple and then the yellow out here. It did not include those, and I don't even know if it went up as far.
Yeah, this,
up to
technically,
gold
this
as
is
what
a
you have it.
0.2% annual chance floodplain, or it's not a regulatory area.
500 year.
Yeah, it's a 500-year floodplain or an area with shallow flooding, so we're not exactly sure. This mapping was developed 25 years ago. That's another reason why it would go into our business plan as a fairly high priority to get done. And that 300,000, that may turn out to be 400,000. We're pretty early on in the process here.
I
In-
mean, if you guys are paying for it, Have
well,
at it.
it's,
And that's what is your urgent?
so in terms of what we've seen here locally, Eric, you went through the process when hopefully yours was gonna do their store remodel. What impact had this whole process had on their ability?
Determining the base flood elevation with Bill and going through that, taking that time. I think the bigger impact has been tax credits and facade program. We've had, the paddle wheel wasn't able to participate in the facade program because they were in a floodplain. I know there's been other projects that have applied for historic tax credits and are in the floodplain and not eligible, and they know they're probably not in the floodplain, but it doesn't matter unless you go through.
not
And
only
then-
that,
Plus-
but
plus
they're
paying
residents,
insurance
yeah,
premiums
residents are
too for
paying
flood.
$5,000 plus a year in insurance.
That's the goal,
That's
is
gonna
to-
be
to get a realistic view,
In-
make sure they're not paying.
And the most recent one was when Tim was looking to do an upper story housing,
Yeah, I think applying
And
for CDBG funds or different
using-
things, you're,
using some level of federal funds that
For
was,
streetscaping or street improvements?
his was,
I think his was upper
building-
story.
yeah, building, remodel,
Facades
rehab,
and stuff.
yep,
Yeah.
and
We ran into this in Montgomery County as well, in Red Oak. The city was gonna get a grant to do, basically streetscaping and facade improvements. They're gonna get a federal grant, but the area was in the 100-year floodplain, and so they disqualified from getting any of the grants.
And, not to be a doomsdayer or anything like that, but realistic, hopefully the map's better.
Well,
But there is a chance that it would be increased. I don't think so. I mean, from gonna be worse, but you just gotta realize that that is always a possibility.
Well,
Point is,
or-
it'll be-
Because
it'll-
Or it could shift. I mean, we could be
Totally.
looking at new
Yeah.
buildings that are now sitting in a flood map that weren't previously sitting in a flood map. And
That's true.
And that's something I can do for you folks, is like a little bit of analysis, and I can make it available to you and, Eric, to look at, to see, projected, here's where it's gonna end up going probably, just because of the LiDAR surface.
that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Right.
So-
Because the one thing that worries me the most is if we go through this process and then you guys come back and say, well, congratulations, now your flood map is 50 yards wider
Right,
and it's straighter, and instead of taking all the buildings out, we've added 30 buildings to it, and now we've got a really unhappy downtown area
Right.
that now everybody's paying even more, or the base flood elevation goes high, or
Yeah.
lower, which means now their flood insurance is actually more expensive.
So,
Just because they fall in, out of an A or
mine will
into
not
an
be
AE.
analysis that you can like pin to the wall and say this is what it's gonna be like, but it'll give you an idea of what the changes might be,
Okay.
which might, at least help the discussion.
That'd be great.
Because
And
didn't
I
that,
had a question too. Go ahead.
didn't that event, the one you referred to, Matt, wasn't that before we put the retaining tank or the retention area up
So
on the north end?
the two there was one that happened about 2 years ago. And then there was one that happened in 2010.
2010.
And both of those events
Okay.
flooded that space down there
Just on the one section.
enough, yeah.
Were those like 6 or 8 inch rains?
The
They
2010
were,
was.
yeah, 2016 was probably a 6 or an 8 inch rain as well.
Because typically, a 100-year rainfall event is typically about 8.
We've had 2 in 10 years, so I'm
Okay.
just throwing that out there.
About 8 inches in 24 hours is what a 100-year event is,
Okay.
approximately. And so, like we said, we can't guarantee that the floodplain will get smaller, but you'll have a much more scientifically based representation of the floodplain than you have now. Right now, we don't know how this Zone A was even developed. There's no model to back it up. It's just a mystery.
Yeah.
So,
So Scott, my question had to
Yes.
do with helping to connect the dots and see why we're doing this. So futuristically, we can see where the trouble spots are, where we need to put permeable pavers in, or what is this gonna do? This is gonna help keep dirty water out of the Mississippi? I mean, there's
right.
a long-term
it's a
goal
very,
for this,
very good
isn't there?
question, ma'am. It'll allow you to manage the floodplain much better. And like you said, if you wanna put sustainable stormwater features in, it'll help you determine where those should go and
Okay.
stuff like that, so, I see some advantages to it. Again, we're just identifying this as in the business plan, as something that can be done that would hopefully improve the
Yeah.
floodplain.
I always like to know the advantages for people, not,
Sure.
because some people are gonna come out on the wrong end of this and be angry at us.
Potentially. Potentially.
Yeah,
So there's a few advantages. One will be the risk awareness and risk identification will be a lot more defined, which will then allow you folks to look at mitigative opportunities and where do you want to mitigate, where is it worth mitigating, doing other projects like that. Will also enable folks to, if it does shift or minimizes, they could get lower insurance rates because they're no longer in the floodplain. It can go, the right way. And that's what it does.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
okay. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Is
thank
there
you.
any-
Thanks, Scott.
Is there anything you need from us in order to move forward?
I think, I don't know if we need anything on the storm, on the combined system. We need anything on that?
We can just talk to you folks, emails and.
Okay.
And then follow email after this, and then if there's anything you need from us, let us know.
Because we'll put it into the business plan ourselves, but if we need any information, we'll work through you and your staff.
I'll work on getting you something to look at for where the possible course.
Yeah, some sort of preliminary report on that. That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
All right. And third discussion item is amendment of franchise agreement for funding Cascade Bridge improvement.
no one wants to lead this.
Nope.
So I guess I did have a memo in there for you to look at. What did I say in that? Is there anything of any value that meant anything to you?
Had pretty pictures on it.
It had pretty pictures. So I did talk to Alliant in terms of the process that you need to go through, and you see the base process that they have for doing it. If you look at the one-page summary that they have on how the process works, it begins with the city deciding on what you want to do in terms of a franchise fee and at what percent. Working with Alliant to make sure that they're willing to do an amendment, because this would be an amendment of our existing franchise agreement. We just approved that 2014. And actually, for timing of what we were talking about, for if you're to put a franchise fee in for replacement of the bridge, you'd probably be looking at just for the remainder of the existing agreement, which is 20 years. To have any extension beyond that expiration date requires essentially a new vote anyway.
Well, but didn't we essentially decide that we only wanted to have the franchise fee in place long enough to cover the cost of the bridge?
Well, so what are we gonna be able to do for a bridge? Jesse, what do you see as the ability to do replacement versus rehabilitation, and what kind of hoops are there for each one?
So in the last couple of weeks, I've been on the phone with the DNR regarding the state historic preservation and Cascade Bridge as it is now. I assume you're all aware that it's a pretty unique bridge, and it is on the historic register of places. So it does have some strings attached into demolishing the existing bridge.
Like,
Essentially, we have to get it delisted from the National Register of Historic Places.
and what red tape or walls does that create? Cost even?
Depends on who you talk to.
I feel like wouldn't that mean that we also wouldn't be eligible for certain funds?
Well, you're eligible for the funds to do it, but if you
It doesn't
accept
change,
the
really.
funds, you have to go through the whole federal process
Yep.
of getting it delisted.
Right.
And you're gonna really have to do that either way.
So, yeah, okay.
So, essentially, you have to examine all your options as far as, can you demo it, can you rehab it? And we've already done some of that, but apparently not to the satisfaction of the State Historical Preservation Office. So we have to go through a couple more steps to satisfy them and the federal government to get it delisted and build a new bridge in its place.
Does the hazard that it currently presents expedite any of this process?
No, not that I've got any kind of indication.
And as we've kind of talked about it, even if you had an engineering report that said it was definitely at risk to just fall at any time, would that expedite it with SHPO?
I didn't specifically ask him that question, but I don't really get the indication maybe that would be the case.
Yeah, we haven't seen much that they're willing to do. Regardless, they would rather do anything other than have the bridge taken off the list and demolished.
They wanna give us $7-8 million?
$1 million to
I
rehab
mean,
it?
that
No.
works,
Oh,
we're good.
good.
No,
Well, and I think you can get to that point, but it's gonna take a few steps along the
Yeah.
way to get there, and money involved in doing those, so we're digging into the steps and processes that the federal government's laid out. It's likely gonna involve some public meetings with the local historical groups and advocates of the bridge as it currently is. Ultimately, if things go well as far as demolishing it, it just is a matter of documenting what's there, providing some kind of memory or tribute to the bridge and moving on. But obviously, I'm not gonna say that that's gonna be the path, but a lot of times that's the way it goes. So it just depends, because it's a fairly unique structure.
Okay, and then, so then the original question I asked is, as far as bridges go, do we have any idea of what it would cost to do just a typical concrete structure? I know we had estimates from 7-8 years ago.
5 to
Two-
6 million?
Yeah, inflating it out, and it's kind of hard to know. I mean, that's a 3% inflation factor at the,
In today's cost.
and if you look at construction costs have gone up typically more than that 3%. So the base dollar amount that we had was probably, if you were doing it this year, which we're not, was 4.7 million.
So, a couple of years, we could be talking on the high end, maybe
It would-
7 million for a basic bridge.
And probably looking on the Klingner's example, what, if you were to put they did 4 different examples, 2 of them concrete and 2 of them steel.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't give a preferred route to go, but they were looking at, from a cost basis, the concrete as being a better product and cheaper. But they did talk about being some significant aesthetic improvements if you added about 500,000 to that cost, which
To
you
the
would
concrete?
probably, to the concrete
Yeah.
one, which is
Okay.
probably
Do
the
it.
kind of route that you would
Yeah.
look to go.
I agree, let's make it pretty,
Which-
it's not
which-
real striking right now. We
Which
can do
does put
better.
you more into that $6 million range, which we've been talking about as a potential cost on it.
Okay.
At the same time, we haven't been talking about what is the actual demolition cost gonna be, and depending on, it may be more cost associated with the evaluation process
And the
that's
delisting.
required with SHPO than what the actual
Demo part is.
demo part is. So you need to know that and we wanna get somewhat of a better estimate of what we're talking about for potential costs, so that
Yeah.
as you look at that comparison between, rehabbing and putting in a new bridge, that you have a good idea of what that true cost comparison is when you add in that demolition cost.
What do we think that looks like? I mean, we were talking
You know-
$20,000, we talking $250,000
50 to 100 would be my best guess.
just to get it deregistered?
Yeah,
It's a guess.
that's my best guess.
But
Yikes.
what we know is that it's not gonna be, it's not a really simple process. We know that we're gonna have some more engineering costs associated with doing a true estimate on that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to evaluate a few other options, and that comes with either our engineering or a consultant.
We gotta do it anyways, right? I mean,
Right, I mean,
this is
yeah.
just more of an
Yeah.
update than really an idea. I mean, we have to go through these processes regardless, because we've
Yes.
gotta do something with the bridge eventually, so
Correct.
we're gonna be spending this money, whether we spend it today or we spend it 10 years from now, we're gonna spend it.
Yep.
Okay.
You just need to know it's there. You need to know that a demolition, or whether it's just with straight demolition and not replacing, or putting in a new bridge, I don't know what the time frame on that is, but it's not a 4 to 6 month type deal.
Right, the points of contact that I touched base with at the DOT said the SHPO process itself could be a 2 to 3 year process.
Just to get delisted?
Yes,
2 to 3 years?
2 to 3 years is what they're telling me, so.
So if it falls down in that time and hurts somebody, are they taking the responsibility for this? I mean, how?
No, but they
No,
also
it's-
don't give us the ability to move forward.
Basically.
So what if we
allows us
just
to
did
get
it
done.
and didn't ask for their permission?
Probably get fined.
I mean, what happens? That's a
Well-
serious
Nice
question.
try, man.
So do we not get some kind of grant money? Do we get yelled at?
I
can
didn't
get
go
yelled at.
down that road with them,
What-
but,
What SHPO,
essentially, you're not gonna get any kind of federal money.
Which would equal about $1 million.
And
could- yeah.
it also has the potential to impact future projects.
Okay.
And that's not just federal funds, that is any project that involves an evaluation from SHPO.
State Historical Preservation Office.
And that's a process that you can find a potential for punitive things to be done that have a hidden cost on other projects.
As you go through this delisting process, though, is there a possibility that because there'll be some angst about taking it off, that maybe some rehab dollars might become available because we are pursuing the delisting? I mean, I would think that would be a possibility.
Yeah, we haven't looked into that much, but
What-
it's a possibility.
What we have seen is that Well, what have we talked about from a federal funding perspective?
So currently, every year we're eligible for $1 million in the city bridge fund from the DOT. And then there's also a state bridge fund, which is $500,000. And each one has strings attached with it on what you can use it for. I think the $500,000 you can use for things like the SHPO work and design, but the $1 million is strictly for construction, so.
Okay. So is the correct
You also, I'm sorry, the other part of what I wanted to get at, which you're not going down, is, as we've talked about some of the federal sources that have been out there, over time, where we could potentially be considered, one of the things that stood in our way is that we aren't to a process where we've gotten formal approval on any work that we're doing moving forward.
Right.
And that, whether that's doing a new bridge or doing a rehab,
Right.
in order to be considered for that federal funding, we would have to be in a position where we've gotten all approvals from SHPO.
Yeah, so there was some discretionary funding, kind of to get where
This
you're
last
going.
year.
There was discretionary funding that was available last year that we were looking really hard at trying to get, but essentially they want a shovel-ready project, where you have all of your environmental, from endangered species to trees, plants, everything like that, all your environmental and all your SHPO put to bed, and essentially you're ready to put it out for a bid.
Okay.
They say your chances of getting that type of discretionary funding, it comes up periodically, usually every year, if the funds are available out there, but essentially your chances of getting that funding, if you don't have a shovel-ready project, go way, way down. And that's kind of why we got thrown out of that funding pool about 6 or 8 months ago.
So I want to understand this process real quick. So we essentially need to start that process, and in the meantime, come up with the preferred design of the bridge, assuming we're not going to repair the existing one, in order to determine the fee amount or percentage, and then we have to present that to Alliant, get their permission, and then we have a vote on it?
Yeah.
For a
So,
project that we may not be able to tear down an existing bridge 2 years from now?
which is kind of where I'm hesitant on the 13-year versus a 20-year. 13-year franchise fee is adequate funding to do a replacement bridge. Doing a rehab, you're really more to that, towards that 20 years. If you're moving forward with a new bridge, I don't know which way you want to go on that. I just know that you need to be thinking about the replacement process it's not something that you're gonna see happen immediately.
No, I would.
So you need to make sure that you're, well, but you're talking at least
Right.
a 2-year process to get to a point where, or potentially a 2-year process to get to the point where you can say that you can officially move forward now with design and then construction of that new bridge, which is more like 4 years out where you're actually seeing work begin.
So, real quick question,
Whereas on a rehab,
We could just do it,
you could just do
in
it.
a sense.
Well,
Without
don't-
having to go through the process of getting it deregistered.
well, but how much, the engineering report that we read a couple weeks ago suggested that a rehab of that project, the life of the bridge would just be another 30 to 50 years.
Yeah,
Where a replacement would be another 100 years. I don't wanna handicap a future council because we didn't wanna make the decision to go through this process.
and as I've stated, that the bridge is a pretty unique bridge, and unique bridges are harder to inspect and maintain over the life of them. It is a fracture-critical bridge, so they do have a little bit higher, inspection costs and maintenance costs associated with them, so it's something else to keep in mind with
Yeah,
the rehab
just-
option.
Is there any way with our process with SHPO to request a meeting with them?
Yeah, and I think we're heading down that path. I've talked to basically the DOT contacts that work with the State Historical Preservation Office that moderate that whole effort. And, essentially we're facilitating early talks of that
Right.
happening and getting stakeholder meetings together in Burlington to
Right.
Maybe
try
they
to
can
establish a direction.
come here and drive over the bridge a couple times.
Because
They can let
as
us-
much as, because as much as, you know, Cascade Bridge is a historical landmark for Burlington and the citizens, it's also important that we find a solution to, and I would say, building a new bridge. And without the bridge being taken off of the historical registry, there's no way we can do that. And I think our best option is to replace it.
I
But-
think the only way they'll try to point you to is going around it or something like that.
Right.
But even in our last report, and just looking at the topography around there, there's no real good route
Yeah.
to go around it.
Well, my immediate concern is any liability associated with the existing structure sitting there. So
Yeah, absolutely.
and this isn't probably a Jessica question, this is probably more of a city attorney question, but what exposure, if any, do we have given the limitations of our ability to tear it down?
Well, we don't have for one, we don't have an engineering report that says it is in imminent danger of collapse and we've got a problem.
But we haven't looked at it again in 12 years, so.
What, we're gonna be caught though between that legal liability and what is being allowed from a state agency that's essentially handcuffing our options.
And that's my concern, they were saying, we don't wanna lose $1 million bucks, but
Before we get into a position where we really have firm discussions about demolition, as we've talked with a couple of, besides your talks with DOT, talking with some engineering firms about this, we need to make sure that we are in a spot where where we have satisfactorily worked with SHPO to say that we have considered the options that they think we need to be considering. And you can't go into that meeting with saying, we've already decided. So
Right.
that's one that we wanna make sure that we're sensitive to making sure that we're
Absolutely.
approaching SHPO from the right perspective. We
Absolutely.
have to be going to them from that perspective of, we wanna make sure that we've evaluated it in a way that's satisfactory to you before that final decision is made. I mean, based on what we know right now, we've come up with a decision, but we wanna make sure that we're also stating that we're open-minded to looking at what options are before us, dependent on what comes out of whatever is required of us to take a look at and evaluate. Part of that process, we know they're gonna want us to make sure that we've had at least another public meeting here locally to try to get feedback on what's being discussed, and but we wanna do it in a way that SHPO's is gonna be willing to buy off on, that we've done it to their satisfaction.
Right. Yeah,
So-
because in the end, we are asking them to do something for us, whether it's,
Whether you may
Right.
individually be agreeing that that's what should be asked of us or not, it is
Yes.
what the framework is
So
that
what do
we
you-
have to work with.
what do you need from us right now then?
So if you wanna move down the idea on, the franchise fee, if you wanna have that discussion, I need to talk with Alliant, I think they'll be willing, cause I mean, we've worked with them in the past, they're fairly agreeable to having something like this. The bigger piece will be, do they wanna have any other amendments under consideration at the same time that we're talking about this? We can have that be the 3% for 13 years, where you're saying this is hard and fast, we're only doing it for a bridge replacement. We're not willing to talk about it for that rehab, if that's what comes of it. Or you could have it for just open-ended in that contract.
How do we know the percentage is gonna be correct until we have a good idea of what the bridge cost is gonna be?
3% will cover you, in a 13-year time frame. It would do it on that rehab side, give or take, and you're only doing estimates regardless, so you know you're not gonna match it dollar for dollar. 20 years would get you into it if you're doing a full replacement.
I like the
and-
idea of the sunset clause, so it doesn't go on forever, but at this point, I'm not interested in pursuing a franchise fee. Too many people have come to me and said, I will not support this. I am not on board with this. So I just flat out tell you, I'm not for it at this point.
The other option, if you're looking for GO bonds and you wanna, I mean, it is a GO bond, eligible, and that's not an election, it is an essential corporate purpose. It's one that the council has to make that decision. You can go, I mean, based on what Jesse is saying, you're likely not going to get to where you can even do a bridge replacement, prior to when we have it in our, or have been discussing doing it during the budget cycle, 2024, in that time frame.
I thought we decided to propose the franchise fee to give the city the opportunity
Yep.
to determine whether or not it was in their appetite to replace the bridge.
We
I
did,
mean,
2
I-
weeks ago, Matt, we did, and then a lot of people have called me, emailed me, texted me, and said, no, no, no.
Well, my concern
they're
is
not
if
for
we say,
this.
oh, we're not gonna do it now because of the pressure put on by the people that don't wanna do it, we're limiting the voice of the people that do wanna do it.
Because
So
chances
far,
are,
I have heard
chances
no
are,
voices of anybody that is for it.
because
I've
nobody,
heard
very
several,
few
but-
people,
Not.
excuse me, very few people will voice their opinions when they're in agreement. That is, I'm sorry, but that is the way it goes.
I know, I
If
agree,
they
but we
agree with
tried it
you-
before and it failed miserably, and I just don't see it passing at this point in time.
But-
I love
but even-
Cascade Bridge, I love to see it replaced,
if it-
but I
even if
have
you-
to represent the people that
Would
elected
you,
me in this
would you
spot.
approve a tax raise then? For us to do a GO bond, you know?
How much would that add to the,
It would,
Quite
If you're-
if
significantly.
it's the same thing, we're just
If
talking
you're
a
trying to,
different language.
if you're trying to do it now and you're not backloading debt, it would be somewhere between, the lower end would be like the 70-cent property tax increase and the higher end of $1.30.
I just think people are strapped right now.
But I mean,
They're fighting to pay their,
regardless of whether or
bills.
not they pay for it on their utility franchise, or utility bill, or they pay for it on their property tax bill, they're gonna
the
pay
same
for
amount.
it.
If
So,
you do it sooner.
Or in
they're gonna
50 years.
pay for it, and,
Yeah.
and
When we
that's
have
one of the
hovercrafts and we
reasons,
just
that's
go
one of
over
the reasons why I really like the idea of having the referendum, was to gauge the appetite of the citizens of the city for whether or not they even wanna pay for the bridge in the first place.
I see it as wasting $8,000 when I already know what the answer's gonna be, Matt.
Well,
how many people have you heard from?
A lot,
How many is a lot?
a lot.
There's 20, what's the population?
25,000.
5,000? That's what I'm saying though, is
What's your take on this, John? What do you,
Well,
throw you under the bus, John,
well,
what do you,
here,
what's your take?
I guess, you know, I put it out there before, and, you know, as far as whether we could vote on it some way, and I guess the franchise fee would be the way to vote on it. Now, I'm not thrilled about spending $8,000. By the same token, because this has been a lingering issue for 10 years, and what we're really, in my mind, deciding if we put it to a franchise fee vote is, are we willing to do it, pay extra to do it sooner than what our financial model shows that we may be able to tackle it? Because
We may.
huh?
And we may.
In May. We may be able to do it sooner, and that is May, because the financial model, if everything holds true, 2024 is what Jim said, or it could be, if things go south, it could be longer out. Things go great, you know, it could be sooner, but that, my goal would be, by putting out there as franchise fee, we've spent more money for less result. It would give the silent people and the loud people a chance to vote and say, yes, we are for doing this sooner, but it's either that or you wait until the financial model and gamble, and that, waiting until the financial modeling lines up, it means it's us five determining the fate of this bridge.
and I
And
kinda,
whereas we would give our citizens a chance to vote on that.
John, I would agree.
That's the only reason why
I would agree with you, but I view the vote as the opportunity for people to determine what their appetite is to replace it at all.
Yeah, well, I know,
I mean, if
that
it's-
vote could be the same thing, yes.
Because whether we're, like I said, whether we're paying for it today, or we're paying for it in 5 years, and whether we're paying for it on our utility bill, or we're paying for it on our property taxes, we're still paying for it. It's not just gonna miraculously appear, so.
But doing it
We,
sooner is
we
gonna
haven't had,
cost us more.
we haven't provided the opportunity for the city to vote and show us what that would look like.
Right.
Which is why I really like the idea of doing that. You know, there's people in the audience tonight that would probably vote in favor of it. And there's possibly people in the audience that wouldn't vote in favor of it. But, I still think giving people the opportunity to vote would be important.
Because I think that, you know, we may say hopeful things like 2024, but reality is that we will have many other infrastructure projects to take care of because of the lack of income that the city gets. There will always be streets that need
There's always gonna
fixing.
be needs.
There will always be buildings that need repair that the city is responsible for. The bridge is something that we are responsible for. But it's not something that many people consider as essential. Some people do consider it essential. But until the majority considers it essential, I can almost guarantee you that it will never get replaced based on that financial model. Because before that, I'm almost positive we had said that we were going to be able to replace the bridge sooner.
2024 was
Is that the
when I've talked
latest?
about it for
Right.
several years. But I'd have a concern about it right now. And the main concern is, I mean, we haven't seen the sales tax dollars for the flood wall come in. We haven't had a payment on that in a year and a half. If that doesn't pick up and
in
start
trouble.
to make payments, we're gonna need the flexibility that we have starting in 2024 to be making just the debt service payments on that debt.
Yep.
That's why I'm not including it in
Right.
the CIP. If we get the money from the state for that sales tax piece on the flood wall, we have the ability to have a discussion about 2024. The flexibility is there. It's just until the money shows up,
Right.
you can't bank on it.
Right, so I want everyone to be clear, and I just want to make sure that I am understanding this, is that when we say 2024, that's just something we've said. That is
Right.
not in the CIP.
It's not in the CIP.
It is not in the CIP.
There is a reason why I haven't included
It's
it on the
just
CIP, because
there.
I don't have a guaranteed funding stream.
Exactly.
And the
Okay.
only way that is going to happen is if a franchise fee is voted for,
So
in favor of.
if you do go down the franchise fee route, and you have plenty of time for this to all happen, because you can't get this on for a vote until the November election, you'd have to let them,
That's fine.
the county needs to know 46 days, I don't know, something like that, 2 to 3 months in advance of the election that you're moving forward. Before you can provide notice, you have to have a public hearing, an ordinance that approves the amended franchise. You're probably gonna be doing 3 readings on that, so that's a 2-month process to get to that.
Yep.
You're gonna have a approved, revenue purpose statement for how you're using the franchise fees. We've talked about it being a 3% franchise fee. The reason for that, the first percent is a wash with local option sales tax. The local option sales tax, 1% fee on your utilities goes away and is replaced by that first penny. And in the revenue purpose statement that I put to your packet as a what if, the first item on there is public safety. And I showed 2 different ways of language on there. The top half is the categories that are in state code. The bottom half is what we would specifically be using it for, and I don't know if you can go that specific. I need an answer from an attorney on that. But we'd be using it to fund police officers and police equipment, which is what 25% of our local option sales tax revenue is used for now. And that would be what that penny would be.
So if a person's, let's say a person's Alliant bill is $150 on electric only, because it wouldn't be gas, correct? Is electric is
Just
what we're
electric.
talking. So if it's $150 and it's basically a 2% gain, you're looking at $3 increase on your bill.
Mhm.
Okay, I just wanna make sure I had the math right.
And when you talk about a difference between using a franchise fee or doing an increase to the debt service levy to pay for it, it's a wash in terms of what you need for dollars on an annual basis, but it does change who's paying for it. Folks with a comparatively higher electric bill are gonna pay more under a franchise fee structure. Folks with a comparatively higher, property tax value will pay for it more with a debt service levy.
Including
There's
businesses and factories and that.
correct.
Okay.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind is if you do a franchise fee, you're also you're increasing the base of that tax, because now you have entities like churches or schools
Correct.
or manufacturing facilities
Or
that
a
are currently being
Or a
tax
Silgan
abated.
manufacturer that doesn't pay any property taxes,
So,
that would pay this.
so you are increasing that base, but regardless, as I've already stated, whether we're paying for it on our property taxes or paying for it on our utility bill, we're still paying for it.
And one of the things that I did, regardless of if you're looking like a 13-year for a replacement or 20-year for a rehab, I did put a catch-all category in there. I put the third one, the flooding, projects designed to prevent or mitigate flooding. Just have a shortfall on our funding for the flood wall project that we've already committed to. And you could have this designed to have that excess, whatever you might have that would be over what your actual costs were, go into that. Because
Yeah,
the alternative is we're using debt service to cover that.
yeah.
It shouldn't be a tremendous amount, but we have tried to have it be enough that we were adequately covering the cost of the bridge replacement within a franchise fee.
All right, so I guess because of all of those pieces take time to
The first,
happen.
to move forward, the first thing we need is, I mean, we've talked
Yep.
with Alliant, but we have to get them to be in agreement that
Mm-hmm.
this is okay, and get the modified language on that ordinance. When we have a modified language on there that's appropriate for both sides, the next item that you would see on the agenda is a set date for public hearing for that, approval of that amended franchise agreement.
When is the latest we could be able to see that?
You're gonna need to have that happen in June to really
To
get,
make the,
because you're gonna wanna by the July 1, to be comfortable on timing for notification, that you'd want the July 1 meeting to be the public hearing and first reading.
first reading, July 1,
Okay,
if it should come to that, or,
Yeah, and you obviously don't have agreement amongst you
yep.
up here that that's the route that you wanna move.
yeah, and that's good, because we're not all the same people.
But we also want you to know that as we've looked at what your options are in terms of what you do with the existing structure, that's gonna be a complicated process, and you need to know
That's
that
gonna
too.
put a delay on it right there.
I mean, but we gotta start down that road regardless.
Yes, so,
I mean,
No,
and
we could
again,
just not do
we
anything.
have met with,
with the bridge, The existing one?
We could just not do anything.
we have met with one firm to talk about what it would take what they put together for a scope of work. They didn't have a price on it. We need to, they wanna know if we feel the scope of work is adequate or not before they put together an actual agreement. But I think you wanted Jesse to make contact with at least another firm, to see what they can do for us, so that have some level of, comparison between a couple of different entities.
And Jim or Jesse, how much was that discretionary funding that's occasionally available? Are we talking $1 million, $1.5 million? It wasn't a lot, but I didn't get a figure from you what that occasionally was.
So the discretionary funding, if we had all of the state historic preservation, environmental, everything put to bed, it was potentially the full amount of the bridge.
Really?
Yes.
I was thinking it
I'm
was
for-
80%, but
I'm
But
for
I think it was
pursuing
at
that.
80-20, yeah.
Hold on, can you say that one more time?
Full amount.
80% of the full cost of the bridge.
we looked at this last year. So as folks, I mean,
How have we not
We've-
pursued this in the past?
we have. Southeast Iowa is, we talked with Southeast Iowa and Regional Planning Council, and this is one that we pushed, last fall. They brought it to us as a potential option.
October, November. And again, the barrier was having shovel-ready
Ready.
plans.
But that's something that we heard on the backside.
Exactly.
This, as our bridge was brought up for a potential discretionary pot that the state was looking to try to get, this bridge was considered, and what we heard was that they decided not to, that ours wasn't eligible for what they were trying to do.
So essentially, the best plan of action would be to come up with a shovel-ready project and see if it works.
Go fishing for
Yeah,
years.
but then you're also subject to timing, and so you know that and just that you are eligible doesn't mean that you
Oh, fair enough.
are gonna get it.
But we're gonna have to have it delisted regardless, right? So if,
Or go
unless we rehab it, I'll put that asterisk next to it, unless we rehab it. But, then it wouldn't have made sense just to go ahead and continue with the delisting, have a shovel-ready project, wait a cycle or two and determine whether or not those funds become available and are awarded. And then if they're not, then go down the process of funding it through the city?
Certainly a
That's
strategy we could
certainly
take.
one that we're willing to, from a staff side, work on. And then you wouldn't be talking about going down the franchise fee ordinance right now.
It's a lot of hoops to jump through, but I think we better start jumping through some hoops.
Been jumping through
Getting
hoops
there.
for 15 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Something more to think about and talk about.
And I know that we're up on a timeline for some folks here.
Yep.
So,
Thanks, Jesse.
was there anything else that you wanted to cover on this item before we're done?
I think we,
I don't think
No.
there's anything else for us to really,
Well, so,
I mean,
if you talk to Alliant, you can continue down that path, but we can always put the brakes on it.
Yep.
That's,
absolutely.
so continue down that path and we'll.
And
It sounds like
I gave you a hard and fast kind of timeline that
Yeah.
you need to hit to get on the November election. You don't have to hit that election cycle.
but it sounds like the thing that we really need to put the pedal down on is getting the delisting process
Yep.
started and going through that. Because
Yes.
like he said, it could take a year or it could take 6 months.
But do it in a way that doesn't alienate other organizations.
Well,
Correct.
the great
And-
thing about the delisting process is
Say that.
you might spark some,
Yeah, absolutely.
you might spark some, wait a minute, they're gonna tear it down, we need to come up
Yep.
with some other funds to help them, so I think that's what
Help
we need
save it,
to do.
yeah.
Yep. Okay.
All right. All right, do we have any other things?
We may be adding a set date for plans and specs on the TAMO demo. We had discussion with him. He's progressing, but to hit our deadlines that we'd like with the July 1st meeting, kind of as a backstop in case it isn't done. Would hope that it was done, but
Sounds good.
working on those plans and specs, if we can get them together, we'll have a set date for hearing on that. So that may be added as a set date. Bridge race again this Saturday, May 18th. We have online registration through noon on Thursday. After that, you can do paper registration here at City Hall through Friday or at the port Saturday morning. Encourage everyone to come out and support that. There's a bridge walk as well, so even if you're not a runner, you can do that, and funds go to help support the parks, looking at a playground improvement adjacent to the Dankworth Park pool.
What's the approximate time that will occupy the downtown for people that aren't running?
The bridge race starts at 10 o'clock, so that usually gets through the downtown within a half hour or so, but we'll set up some cones and barricades starting around 9, so about 9 to 10:30. Portions will be inaccessible. We'll keep Main Street open until just before the race.
Okay. Eric, are you racing this year?
I am not. I have been sick the last 2.5 weeks and have not been able to
The
run
odds
at
were
all,
stacked in
so,
your favor to
What
finally,
know.
is
to wipe out the
that?
great one.
The
yeah.
great one.
Who's been hurt? I haven't been able to run
See,
and
it's
practice
down-
for
it's
6
down here
months.
for
Yeah.
him.
You're
Yeah.
gonna win.
Linda's my pony, I'm putting.
Get him,
Jim's,
get him while he's winged.
Sports betting was opening and we can't bet on anybody.
I tried to run this morning and it was a disaster. It was a hard winter on everybody, but
Yeah, nobody's
just for the record, bridge race is 10 a.m. I know the radio was saying that it was 8 to 10, and I don't want people showing up at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wrong time, so it is 10 a.m.
Any of you
so.
are welcome to
and the bridge walk starts at 11, so
run in
those
it
that
and
want to
count
walk.
and go get
It's
your
gonna be a
calendar.
beautiful day, so everybody check it out.
Last thing, just real quick, Preservation Month informational session at the Public Library on Wednesday, May 15th at 6:30, so I encourage people to come out to that.
One quick question, how's the registration for the city day camp? Is it open? Is it open?
City Day Camp is still open. I think we have mid-40s, so we usually look to cap it around 50 or so,
Oh,
so we still have a
50.
few openings, so.
Wow, yeah.
I think
And I
we-
know every time my daughters went, she absolutely loves it.
So go to the city's website under Parks and City Day Camp at Perkins Park all summer.
Yeah, very good,
I'm
thank you.
signing John up for it.
He's too old. Oh, sorry. Do you have anything, any other?
No,
Okay.
intellectually, I really, I don't have anything. Water's going down, thank God.
Yeah, and, you know, one of the things with that, a lot of this the HESCOs that we've had up have come off of Main Street. I'm not sure if it's open yet. It wasn't this afternoon. but,
Yeah,
the parking lot down between the auditorium and the port, is that supposed to be open tomorrow? So, we should see that opening up tomorrow, as they
at
get
some point.
between the HESCOs and the sandbags out of the way. And I know that they're trying to get it to where the railroad, the short line, was able to run up north. They weren't, I don't know if he got done today. Tomorrow morning they'll finish that up.
There's
So
a lot of debris on the track.
there was, I mean, they're
I can
too
imagine.
high, and Tara knows a part, one of the biggest concerns as they do that is how do you make sure you tear it apart in a way that you don't damage what you leave up. And, I mean, that's one of the things, staff-wise, as we've already taken them down from being across the tracks a couple of times, and then reconnected new ones over, that was one of our weakest points, and where we saw the most sand come out of the HESCOs. That is naturally our, if you were to look at where we had the most likelihood of having a breach of our HESCOs, it was where we accommodated the short line.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't have anything else. Nick was part of the Leadership Academy, so he's not here tonight. He's down there for the graduation ceremonies. And that was really the only thing I wanted to make sure I highlighted. I know, was asked, if, council had radio this week. No, you don't. You had that
We had
last
it
week.
last week, yeah.
Yes. So, but Matt wasn't sure.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we can go unless somebody else had an item.
Anybody in the,
Any- Dave, is this your last meeting?
what in the
Thank you for your
world?
service to Burlington, David.
All right. I
David
guess we'll let you go.
Hightower's going to WHO in Des Moines.
Ooh.
Our-
The flagship.
Yeah,
the
the
mother
flagship,
station.
our
The
little bird is
mothership.
leaving Burlington.
Okay. If that's it, then thank you for everything, and that's all. Good night.